Good morning, everybody, and good evening, Peter. How's everybody doing today?
Good.
Good, great. Marco, how are you this morning?
Great.
I'm okay. This is, well, actually, sometimes when I record with Martin, he likes to record pretty early too. So I'm used to recording right at 8 o'clock or whatever. But we're recording in the morning Eastern time today for us. Some folks internationally have different times. I know, Peter, it's at night where you're from. But this will be an interesting conversation. We're talking about Deep Purple today. I almost said The Who because of the name of the album. My brain almost tripped over itself. But we're talking about Who Do You Think We Are, which came out in 1973. This is a Dark Horse album. This is our Dark Horse album edition. So we're going to go around and get everybody's feedback on this album, and everyone's going to rate it out of 10, and then let us know where we can find you. I'm going to do a little bit of research that I found. Who Do You Think We Are was ranked number 8 in Ultimate Classics Rock's Deep Purple album when they ranked them. They said Who Do You Think We Are is far and away the weakest album cut by the vaunted Mark II lineup, which by 1973 was fraying under the pain of incessant touring and the fractured relationship between Gillan and Blackmore. Nevertheless, they still conjured up some magic with the perennial fan favorite Woman from Tokyo, the hypnotizing Super Trooper, and kinetic blues shuffle Rat Bat Blue before taking a nap across much of the remaining tracks. AllMusic gave the album 2 stars. This is a pretty lengthy review, but it talks a little bit about the history. So I'm going to read the whole thing. This will be the last part of my research. So AllMusic gave the album 2 stars and said Deep Purple kicked off with the 70s with a new lineup and a string of brilliant albums that quickly established them, along with fellow British giants Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath, as a major force in the popularization of hard rock and heavy metal. All the while, the reputation as one of the decade's fiercest live units complemented this body of work and earned them almost instant legendary status. But with 1973's disappointing Who Do You Think We Are, the 4th and final studio outing by the original run of the Purple's classic Mark II lineup, all the fire and inspiration that had made the previous year's Machine Head their greatest triumph mysteriously vanished from sight. Vastly inferior to all 3 of its famous predecessors, the album revealed an exhausted band clearly splintering at the seams, except for opener, Woman from Tokyo, which hinted at glory's past with its signature Ritchie Blackmore riff. The album's remaining cuts are wildly inconsistent and find the band simply going through the motions. In fact, many of these don't so much resemble songs as loose jam sessions quickly thrown together in the studio with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Mary Long and Super Trooper are prime examples, featuring generic solos from Blackmore and organist John Lord and uncharacteristically inane lyrics from a soon-to-be former lead singer Ian Gillan. With its start-stop rhythm and Gillan's fine scat singing, the energetic Rat Bat Blue is a memorable exception to the rule, but the yawn-inducing blues of Place in the Line and gospel mediocrity of Our Lady bring the album to a legendary band grinding to a halt. Who Do You Think We Are was reissued in 2000 with the added incentive of 7 bonus tracks and new liner notes by bassist Roger Glover. So that was their number 1 was In Rock. So that's my research. Those are just 2 reviews that I found. Ultimate Classic Rock's number 1 was In Rock. They ranked it at number 8, and then AllMusic rated it 2 stars. And then that's a different story. But so I'm going to play a little clip from Martin, who can't be here today, Martin Popoff.
Folks, sorry I couldn't make it to the Who Do We Think We Are Dark Horse for this. I was scheduled to do another filming with Pete from Sea of Tranquility. So I've got to do that. But like I've done once before, Marco suggested this. I thought it was a good idea. I would record my segment. I hope I don't drone on too long. But yes, we're talking about this bad boy here. Who Do We Think We Are? So the interesting thing about this album, so this came out January 73. By this point, the band had 1 gold record in Machine Head. And Who Do We Think We Are would go gold by like 3 months after this record came out. And then also right around that time, Made in Japan would go gold as well. So Made in Japan was a big album for them. We definitely can't go by, I shouldn't overemphasize the sort of lack of like huge certifications, because Deep Purple was a massive band by this point. They were beloved. There was a lot of excitement around them. Obviously, we've had In Rock already. Well, there was the old version, but we had Fireball. Machine Head was a big deal. So they came out with this record that they and then there's your internals, right? All the press clippings from it, and there's the back. I always thought this looked quite a bit like Fireball, actually. So this record was recorded in a mobile in a couple places, Rolling Stones mobile in Rome, in Frankfurt. The band was fighting a lot, but also the band was exhausted. They were touring super hard. They were all sick. Management was a nightmare for them. They felt really exploited, and I think, truth be told, they were pretty exploited. But I always defend this album because of a couple things. I mean, I'm a massive Deep Purple fan. We've done a Contrarians episode where I rated Perfect Strangers my favorite album by them, and that is because of the math. And the math is what raises this album up. And then I think, for me, anyways, lowers Machine Head and Fireball. In comparison, I mean, this is the worst of the three. Of course, this is the last one before the end of the Mark II lineup for the first time. But, I've got to say that on Machine Head, you've got Never Before is not a great track. And you've got Smoke on the Water, which I think is overrated. You play all the parts to that, and I find that kind of a boring song. And I'm not a big fan of Lazy. On Fireball, you could complain about No, No, No. You can complain about Demon's Eye. You can complain about Anyone's Daughter, The Mule, Fools. There's a lot of stuff on there that you can complain about as well. But people kind of like, it's almost like they focus all their complaints on this one. And I find it a very similar album, more so to Fireball than Machine Head. I think the production is excellent. The production on this is better than Fireball, and it roughly matches Machine Head. I think they did a good job of dialing in all the tones. It's got good, warm, ample bass, and the treble is fine, all that kind of stuff. So just going through the tracks quickly, I'm not a big fan of Woman from Tokyo. I never was. That song kind of always annoyed me. It just sounds really kind of boring. I don't like that particular beat and rhythm. I always liken this one to the substandard writing of Never Before and of Strange Kind of Woman. So I've always put those songs together. Mary Long, I think, is awesome. I love that it's got that kind of muscular, propulsive drive to it, and but it's still a mid-pace thing. I love the big meld, the signature meld between Ritchie Blackmore's guitar and John Lord's organ. It's this cool anti-censorship song with Mary Whitehouse, but I think that's a great song. Super Trooper, I don't have a problem with. I'm not a huge fan, but I've always quite liked it. Pretty cool. It's a little psych. Smooth Dancer, to me, is completely awesome. I've always paired this one in my mind with No One Came from Fireball. It's just a good, straightforward heavy metal rocker. But yeah, great song. This is the one that ostensibly is a dig from Ian to Ritchie, which is the main feud in the band. Get to side two. Rat Bat Blue is absolutely awesome. It's proggy, it's heavy. People always remember in their heads when they're thinking about Rat Bat Blue, they're thinking of that intro kind of funky rhythmic sequence, because that's also used at the chorus. But go back, people need to go back and play the verse on that one. I think all told, all the parts, this is a really underrated Deep Purple song that people forget about. Then it does kind of fall down for me. Side two only has these three long songs. Place in Line is them doing kind of a slow blues, and I've always in my mind have paired this one up with Lazy, which is a blues, and I don't like Lazy very much, and it's a long song on Machine Head, so that always knocked Machine Head down for me. And then Our Lady is a curious one. It's the mellowest song on it. It starts heavy and proggy, but it's got this kind of like melancholy, poppy, mellow melody to it. It's got kind of a little Beatles-esque part, but it's got some really cool John Lord things going on in there. So I think it's a pretty cool song. This is the album that's always considered the weak tea version. Oh, they're out of ideas and all that sort of thing. But you can tell they worked pretty hard on putting these songs together. Either that or it was effortless and they're just super, super talented, like one or the other. But the point is that I think there's a lot of cool detailing on here. They didn't phone it in. Whatever you may think of the songwriting, that's kind of an abstract, subjective thing. But I think on an objective level, you can tell that still a lot of work went into this, and there's some cool things on it. So yeah, I've always been a booster of this when people say, oh, it's absolute crap compared to In Rock or Machine Head or Fireball. I don't think there's that much of a gulf between them, except for In Rock, which is pretty unassailable given how important it is and how heavy it is, and how pretty much every song on that album is considered a really good song. Unfortunately, the production's not very good on it. So who do we think we are? I'm going to give a 7.5. Again, thanks for having me, and sorry I couldn't be there. I'm dying to watch this though when it's all done and see what you guys think. Bye for now.
All right, great. 7.5 to start us off with. So I'm going to start throwing it over to the panel. Who do we think we are? I'm going to throw it over to Peter. Let us know what you think. Peter's Rock Daydream Nation. Let us know what you think, what you rate out of 10, and where we can find you.
Thank you. Well, Martin's saying Smoke on the Water, overrated. Wow. Anyway, who do we think we are? I think I think it's aged well. I think that every two albums that the Mark II do has been kind of experimental. So you've got In Rock, which is a bold hard rock statement. And then you did Fireball, which was a bit more sort of a bit more withdrawn, but experimental. And then you had Machine Head, which was more out there, sort of direct, hard rock. And then, who do you think we are? Again, is experimental. Ritchie Blackmore, to me, is like a shark. He's got to be moving forward in what he does. And if he's not totally with the material, he kind of withdraws a little bit and maybe goes a little bit more experimental. He doesn't go the full frontal. And I think in this album that the most valuable players on the album are not Ritchie Blackmore. I think it's the other members of the band. When I was listening to this album, I was thinking a lot of these songs actually swing. And I think Ian Pace is one of the most valuable players on this album. So you listen to his drumming on Woman from Tokyo, Rat Bat Blue, even Place and Line. His drumming has got a groove and it's got a click to it and it swings. And to me, I think he's the most valuable player on this album, and that really gives it a little bit of kick and makes it quite interesting. John Lord, fantastic fills. He steps up to the plate. Rat Bat Blue it's got the most wildest Hammond sequence. It reminds me of, there was an album that came out in the early 70s. I don't know if you guys remember, called Switched on Bark by Walter Carlos. He did A Clockwork Orange. I don't know, but I don't know if Lordy's actually playing it, but it's got that Moog sequence, like a sequence line, and it's just wild, and it really pushes Rat Bat Blue into the other regions. And Deep Purple have this great habit on side one, track one, side two, track one is always a killer. And Woman from Tokyo, to me, that towers over the rest of the album. It's a great song. It was their single. I don't know any of the other songs that were singles off this album, but that were towered over the rest of the album, possibly unfairly. And Rat Bat Blue, killer side one on both tracks. Even the lesser tracks, or I say lesser, but tracks that are not as well known, deep cuts, are really interesting. Mary Long, really interesting social commentary about Mary Whitehouse. Super Trooper, Smooth Dancer, As Martin said, Ian Gillan's lyrics against Richie Blackmore. And Ian Gillan's lyrics are quite bitter in this. There's, obviously there was some acrimony between him and Richie that was sort of foretelling that his departure from, the Mark II lineup. Place and Line is quite interesting, and also Our Lady. I find this an experimental album in the deep cuts. I find that they're experimenting with different sounds. There's double tracking of Ian Gillan's vocals. There's a little bit of psychedelia. They're really expanding their soundscapes. And if Mark III never happened and everything was okay in the Deep Purple Mark II camp, I would have... I sort of ponder what would have been the follow-up album. Would it have sounded like Perfect Strangers? Or would it have been more along the Burn? I don't think it would have been more like Burn, but may have been more traditional meat and potatoes and gone into Perfect Strangers. But I think it's aged well. But to me, and I'm repeating myself, I think the most valuable players on this album are the supporting players, not Richie. I think Richie's come back a little bit. He's just doing what he has to do. And I'm such a uber Richie fan. He just has to, even the tonality and him holding it back is better than most people's efforts. But it's the other players that go to the front. Your Lord, your Ian Pace, even Roger Glover. The supporting players are more to the front, and they really push this. And I think this album has aged quite well. And I'll give it a 7.5.
So we got 2 7.5s, and yeah, I agree. Sometimes Martin says things that surprise me too. Like I like Lazy from Machine Head.
Very controversial. Smoke on the Water. I know it gets played to death, Marco, but it's, just the lyrics, and you're talking about an event. It's compelling. It's one of the great. It's one of the great riffs of all time. Anyway.
Awesome. Thanks, Peter. Yeah. 2 7.5s on the board. We'll see if that changes at all. And let's throw it over to Ryan. Ryan, Final Destination. Let us know what you thought of the album and what you rank it out of 10.
All right. Thank you, Marcos. So I messaged you actually. I was like, I'm glad that we did this episode because I haven't been listening to Deep Purple as much as I used to recently. They just haven't really made it into my rotation a whole lot. So getting to revisit them with this album was interesting for me. The one thing I want to start this off with is that if the band had stayed together as they were with Ian Gillan for a while, would the legacy of this album be the same? And I think not. I think that sometimes when you have albums like this, or you have an album like Never Say Die by Black Sabbath, a lot of people take whatever was going on personal into the band with the band, and then they translate that to the music without actually really listening to the quality of the music. Because I don't think this album is weak at all. I actually don't think there's really anything at all that separates it from the albums that came before. I think it's really experimental. It's heavy. The songs are well written. They're catchy. Richie has some of his best riffs on this album, in my opinion, and the whole band's on fire. So I think that this album is actually remarkably consistent. And I do agree with Martin's point saying that none of the other albums that are considered classics are exactly consistent either. I do think In Rock is very consistent because it's their best album. Fireball's pretty consistent. Machine Head, though, I do have some issues with as well. I love the album to death, but it's never going to be my favorite Deep Purple album. I'll put it that way. Because I don't really like Lazy either. I never did. But so looking at this album, I mean, the only thing on this one that I have any issues with is Place and Line. And the only reason I have issues with it is that I think it starts off really, really cool with the slow blues. feel to it. I think Ian has a really cool tone in his voice. I think it has a really sleazy barroom feel to it. But once it speeds up into the typical Deep Purple crap, it just feels so out of place, and it kills a really good vibe for me. So I think that that's the only track on here that I have an issue with, whereas the rest of the album is fantastic. I mean, my favorite song on here is Rat Bat Blue. I think that's so energetic. It's got funky riffs, some of Richie's best riffs ever, in my opinion. He's on fire on that song. And then, I mean, you have Ian and Roger helping out with that, with the rhythm section. They're just smoking it too. And then, I mean, Ian Gillan, what can I say? He always delivers on these albums. So I think that, like I said, I think that this album gets a little bit unfairly maligned. I mean, I think the production's really excellent. There's some really heavy moments on here. Our Lady is a pretty cool song. I think it's probably the second weakest on here, but it's still really good, because I think it has a good atmosphere to it with the organs. And I think it just tends to not be quite as memorable as some of the other tracks. I mean, you have Woman from Tokyo as the opener, which I think is a really cool song. I mean, I think it's not the strongest song on this album. I actually think this is a great deep cut album for me. But that's still a massive song. I mean, you can't ever mistake that riff for anything else. It's just, it comes in, it's got so much energy. I don't know, the whole song is just music magic. It blew my mind when I first heard it as a kid, and not quite the same effect anymore, just because I've heard so many other great Deep Purple tracks, but it still gets me every time. I think that, Peter, I like I said, I agree with what you said about Ian and John bringing a lot to the table on this album as well. I do think Richie was on top form as well, though, too. Like I said, I think his riffs are on fire. I think his guitar sound on this album is top notch. The production as a whole sounds fantastic. And I mean, I think that this is maybe actually one of my favorite Deep Purple albums. I don't really get the criticism of it at all. I think, like I said, it's kind of unfair, and more so based off of the fact that Ian left the band after, rather than the actual quality of the music, because people love to make narratives when they're listening to music, and like to have this big spectacle. But I don't think that's what this was. I think this album was right in line with the other albums that were around it. I mean, you got Super Trooper on here. That's a killer track. And Smooth Dancer, which is so heavy. That sounds like it could be something off of In Rock. It's heavy, it's in your face, it's kind of proto-punky with its energy. It's just so fast and nasty. I love it. Then you have Mary Long, which is a classic track. That was one of the ones that didn't get me quite as much as when I was a kid. But as I get older, that song gets better and better and better. Yeah, I love this album. I think that it's right in line with the albums that came before. Not as good as maybe In Rock, but I think it's right in line with like Fireball, and maybe a little better than Machine Head for me personally. I'm gonna give it an 8.5, just because In Rock is the only Deep Purple album I'd give a 10 out of 10. There's other bands I like more, but I still love them, and I really like this album a lot.
Wow, you argued pretty hard for it. A bit of a contrarian take there. 8.5. Yeah, I could see Peter down there. All right, cool. We got a new face to the Contrarians panel. Butch, Brian, good to see you.
Good to see you guys. Thank you.
Yeah, why don't you take it away? Let us know what you thought of who do we think we are?
Okay. Well, I'm not going to be too far off the path of where everyone else is. I mean, actually, I came to this record a little bit later than a lot of the other catalog, and Deep Purple's a band that I love, but it did. I think, they weren't like a band that when I was in high school I was listening to regularly. I grew up in the 80s when I first got into hard rock and metal, and my main bands at the time were bands like Kiss, and but I started going back to other bands from the 70s, and for the longest time the only Deep Purple I had was a double cassette collection called Greatest Purple, and I did play the hell out of that. And what I knew from all the hits from the radio, and I loved Woman from Tokyo at the time. So it's surprising to me that it took me as long as it did to actually pick up this record. But I think it was part of the, it's one of those things like the way people talk about Sabbath and, Never Say Die and Technical Ecstasy. I kind of took other people's word for it. It's not as good as Machine Head or In Rock. So I kind of like held off on buying this record. But that being said, I like the album a lot. I think it falls into one of those patterns you see sometimes one of those unfortunate circumstances with an album where it follows such a big influential record that even though it's still a quality record, it's sandwiched in between Machine Head and then where they went with Burn, and so I think it gets lost in the shuffle unfairly. I like everyone has said. I mean, I think track for track it stands up to the most of the other records except for In Rock, which is also my favorite. That's also my Deep Purple 10-star album. But I love Woman from Tokyo. I still love it. It's actually my favorite song on the record. It's one of those times where the big hit is my favorite. I just always like the groove to it, and it's a sentimental thing for me too. I love Mary Long. I love the lyrical topic, and I've always loved Gillan as a lyricist. I think he's clever, and I love the things he did in this song. The one line that every time I'm in the car listening to it and I have to sing along to is what I'm saying, Mary Long, is if you can spare a minute, go find your friend, the porny lord, dig yourself a hole and jump in it. I mean, there's just a visual to that I love. Like, I just picture these folks out digging themselves a grave and jumping into the thing. And so I love that. And of course, growing up at the time, I remember the PMRC well. And so it's, the lyrical topic is similar for all of us. We can all follow along with that. Super Trooper, I think, is pretty good. It's not my favorite song on the record, but it's right in there. It has a good groove, and I do like the song. Smooth Dancer, I love. And again, I love Gillan's lyrics to this song, kind of nipping at Blackmore's heels, which I think is funny. And that, so then on the flip, Red Bat Blue was another song I heard early on from the record, and love that song. That's second favorite on there. So, like Peter was saying, side one and side two, those first songs are just total bangers on this record. And one of the things I love about Red Bat Blue, other than that, how all the fat rhythms and groove in that song, is the middle section. Like Ryan was saying, I love that keyboard. Lord is like going nuts on this, and to me, it reminds me of. There's a little bit of the section that reminds me of Flight of the Bumblebee, a little bit, which I think is interesting, since one of the the lyrics in the song was, I'm gonna keep you as busy as a bee could be. So I don't know, maybe I'm putting stuff together there, but I always thought that was kind of interesting. And I love that song. It's just heavy. I can remember hearing that on the local radio here in Pittsburgh has a show called Electric Lunch where they play the offcuts from the albums. They played Rat Bat Blue, and ever since, I love that song. Let's see what I have here. I think, I guess one of the problems with the record, if I find one, really overall, it's well put together. It sounds good, but I think it's top loaded. Like the first 2/3 of the record, I think are actually really good. And, I think that it puts them right there with the albums before it. I just think that a place in line, and Our Lady, although Our Lady has grown on me, especially I've listened to this album incessantly the last week, and I found things to like about that song, like just little things I'm hearing, like the way the song just at the very beginning comes in with that. It's almost got a little bit psychedelic, like reminds me of Just the Way Are You Experienced by Hendrix comes in just at the very beginning, and it's kind of got like a little bit of Beatles like psychedelia in it, I think, and I love the vocal harmonies in it as a singer. A lot of the things they're doing vocally in that song, I think, are really cool. So that one's grown on me. But Our Place in Lines, I'm not much of a straight up blues guy. I can take it sometimes, but I just think it's boring. Gillan does kind of save it with his vocals. I agree with Ryan on that, especially like that, that real gravelly bit at the beginning when it first comes in is awesome. But otherwise, I think it kind of kills the momentum of the record. And other than that, I think it's a good record. I mean, and honestly, I think Machine Head is one of those ones for me that falls into the same trap that Paranoid does. I love the songs on it, but I've heard them so many times that I don't always feel like I need to hear them. So what happens is this album actually, I might think Machine Head is maybe a better record, but I play this one more. Like I will reach for this one, and that's because I'm not as burnt out on it, I think, as I am on Machine Head. If I'm not pulling In Rock or Come Taste the Band, then I'm pulling like this one. It's just an interesting change of pace for me. I don't know, as far as grading it goes, I mean, I'm for it. I'd probably give it like a 7.5. I mean, if In Rock's a 10, and I love Fireball, it's got its problems, but that'd be like a 9. So I don't know. I'd probably put this at a 7.5, and I'd probably actually put Machine Head at about 7.5 or an 8 too. So that's where I stand on this record. It's thumbs up for me.
Great. Thanks, Brian. Interesting take. Makes a lot of sense to me.
Thank you.
I like the lyric from Mary Long, and Electric Lunch sounds awesome, by the way.
It's pretty cool. I mean, some days it's like they're still playing songs that they play all the time, but a lot of the time they do play like hits by bands, or not hits, but songs by bands you wouldn't expect. So I mean, it's token as far as getting the more unknown stuff out to people, but I'll take it. I mean, it's better than listening to You Shook Me All Night Long for the 5th time that day.
Yeah, I have a hard time with rock radio, but that's another topic for another discussion.
Yeah.
But thanks, Brian. Good to see you. I'm going to throw it over
Thank you. Good to see you guys.
Last, certainly not least, looking good over there with that T-shirt. Reed, take it away and take us home.
Okay, so I think I've probably mentioned in other Deep Purple chats prior to Perfect Strangers coming out, as far as I was concerned, Deep Purple had only ever released 2 songs, which was Smoke on the Water and Woman from Tokyo. I mean, I was alive in 1973. I was 5 years old, so I wasn't really listening to music. And when I started listening to music, Deep Purple was nowhere on my radar. So for years, I considered them to be Rainbow's weaker cousin. And I still generally prefer Rainbow to Deep Purple, but literally just in the last couple of years, I've really, really gotten into the entire Deep Purple catalog. And I will say, I really enjoy Who Do We Think We Are? It's a great album. I will echo other panelists. I hate reading things like, oh, the band were so tired. I'm like, don't tell me what's going on with the band. I don't want that in my head when I'm listening to the music. You can't unhear those things. They get into your psyche and flavor the music. Just let the music speak for itself, man. Now, I will say this is a short album. I don't even know if it's 35 minutes, but
34.
It's 34 minutes, man. That is a short album. So it goes by quickly. And that's one thing about it. If you don't like any of the songs on it, man, they are gone. I mean, in and out, no fuss, no muss. And Brian, I'm not really acquainted with you yet. Nice to meet you. I don't like Fireball. I think that is a terrible album. I think it has the worst song that Deep Purple ever recorded across any of their marks in Anyone's Daughter. That is just a terrible song.
It's pretty rough.
That drops that album to about a 4 for me. I like the song Fireball, but other than that, it's a terrible album. Gillan as a lyricist, he blows hot and cold because he's so stream of consciousness. It's just whatever he's thinking about at the time. And I was thinking, Brian, as he was talking about, it's got a bit of Flight of the Bumblebee in the song, and Gillan comes out with the lyrics about the bee. Gillan did his lyrics last, so he may very well have heard that section and gone, oh, it sounds like Flight of the Bumblebee. I'll throw some bee stuff in there. Plus, he was drunk off his ass the entire time, no doubt. But other than that, just listening to this album, man, I don't hear a tired band on this album. This is a great album. Now, I will say, I don't know why I'm combative this morning. I'm going to take a little bit different take to Ryan on it. I don't hear Richie Blackmore's best material on this. His riffs are fine, but I think John Lord owns this album. I cannot think of one memorable Richie solo anywhere on this album. Now, his riffs are fine, but they're mostly matching up with John Lord's organ parts. But John Lord plays his butt off on this album. All of the most memorable kind of solo feature things come from John. So in that respect, I can see how after, Machine Head is such a tour de force for Richie Blackmore. I mean, he basically invents neoclassical guitar playing on Machine Head. And then to come to Who Do We Think We Are? And there's so much less Richie on it. I can see how that would make people go, well, it doesn't really sound quite the same. And it's true. It's a different sound, but it's still the band, and it still sounds great. And no matter how much fun I poke at Ian Gillan's lyrics, and, if anybody ever needs an example of just how weird Gillan's lyrics are, again, go back to Fireball, which is a terrible album. I think we all agree. And listen to this song. I think it's Strange Kind of Woman, right? The song about his prostitute wife. That is, it's a weird set of lyrics. He wrote a lot of very strange things in his career. I do love the song Smooth Dancer, but I especially love that you go all the way up to Slaves and Masters and they have King of Dreams, which has the line, "I'm a real smooth dancer," as a much, much later callback to this, kind of owning that concept where Blackmore's like, well, yeah, I am that guy. But I love the album. Woman from Tokyo is one of my favorite Deep Purple songs. I love the story of it. They had not yet gone to Japan, but they had booked their tour in Japan, and they literally recorded Woman from Tokyo, like thinking about what it might be like to go to Japan and meet groupies, presumably. And they wanted a song about Japan to take to Japan with them. And when I was a kid, and I'm talking like, 8 to 10, 11 years old, I used to love roller skating, and we'd go to the roller skating rink, and that was where you hear all these old hard rock tracks. And I just distinctly remember in my mind skating around the roller skating rink, chasing little girls. I know it was a lot less creepy when I was 10 or 11 years old. And they were playing Rod Stewart's "If You Think I'm Sexy" and Deep Purple's "Woman from Tokyo" at maximum volume over the sound system in the skating rink. So I just love that song. And I have to agree, Rat Bat Blue is a fantastic song as well. But I don't dislike any of the other songs. And again, John Lord, this is I think his best rock album. I mean, he perhaps was more involved in like the Concerto album. But in most of the albums, he's definitely in the back seat to Ritchie Blackmore. And in this, I think he steps up, and this is my album. And maybe Ritchie didn't want to be that guy for this album, but that's cool. I love it anyway. So I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10.
Nice, solid number. I thought Ryan's review was contrarian. Peter, I see you're dying down there. I'm gonna throw it over to you.
Me? I'm fine.
Okay.
I'm soaking it in from Reed, but Fireball, I think that's unfair. I think that's a fine album. It's experimental. Look, Ian Gillan's lyrics are hot and cold. He can be banal, but he is capable of greatness as well. He's definitely hot and cold. And on this album, I think it's the light and shade and hot and cold of a typical Ian Gillan writing effort. Look, Fireball, I think that's a bit unfair. I think there's some great songs on that album. Demon's Eye. Yeah, you don't like that song, Reed?
Demon's Eye is all right, and Fireball is all right. It's the rest of the album that drags it down.
Yeah.
You don't like Fools either?
It clearly made no impression on me, because when you say that, I'm not hearing it in my head.
Yeah, there's a lot of Ritchie playing with harmonics. He's doing a lot of, as I said in my little spiel, I find that in Fireball, his guitar work, he's drawing it back in, and he's doing a lot of the harmonics, and he's not being as flashy as he was on In Ronk, and I don't know if that's deliberate. And that, I don't know, maybe that's why it doesn't get the credos, because, Ritchie's, when you look at his guitar work, you look at In Rock, Machine Head, and going into Rainbow, Rising, it's all the flashy stuff. But sometimes the not so flashy stuff, where he's dealing with harmonics and tone and just experimenting, doesn't get the credos that it should.
He's an underrated rhythm player. People always, of the bands of the time, Jimmy Page and Tony Iommi are always talked about as the better rhythm players, but Ritchie could really play rhythm.
Well, Stormbringer, look at that album. He could actually play funk. If he didn't like playing funk, but he refused to play some of, I know we're going off on a tangent here, but he refused to play a lot of the solos on this and said, look, I'll only do one take. And he just played rhythm, and one of the solos he just played with a finger, with a thumb. So the guy's a genius. He can just, he could just throw it out in one take and get away with it.
And wouldn't we all love to be at our most genius when we're just being giant dicks?
Ryan, final word, take it away.
Reed, I did want to say one thing about the guitar on the album. So I do agree that the solos aren't quite as there as some other albums, but I'm okay with that because for me, riffs come before solos. If you don't have great riffs in a song, then the solo doesn't matter to me. That's just the way
it's
that
got
I
to serve
see
the
it.
song.
Yeah,
It's got to serve the song.
Yeah, and I think that even if he is just matching up on John's organ parts, he sounds fire on this album to me. So that's where I was coming from with that. But also, Anyone's Daughter is great.
It's sort of like Anyone's Daughter to me was like a bit of a Bob Dylan patash. I thought it was a little bit of a, maybe a little bit of a parody, like a Bob Dylan song. I don't know.
Yeah,
So, Reed, you'd say the most valuable player is John Lord on this album, would you say?
Absolutely. This is a Lord joint for me.
I reckon Ian Pace, he's my MVP on this album. What about you other guys? What do you think? Most valuable player.
With Reed. I agree with Reed. I mean, Lord's all over the place on here. I love his playing on it. I love his playing on everything, but I mean, he stands out, really stands out on this record.
I could agree with that. I mean, I think at times this album kind of gets more of like a Uriah Heep type of sound because of how prominent the organs are. That's something I was definitely thinking about, especially on a song like Super Trooper. They kind of have a little bit of a Uriah Heep vibe on that song. So I'm definitely in agreement there. Although I think everybody kicks ass on this album.
And it makes you think that he may have been more predominant because the recording sessions may have been quite acrimonious. If Lord thought that Blackmore wasn't pulling his weight and he had to add more colour, then he would do so because that's what Lord was doing, like in, a lot of Tommy Bolin stuff and some of the other stuff where he felt that he had to, sort of add more colour and, to the proceedings.
All right. Well, one final thought, because I can see Marco really wants to wrap us up. But 1973, so Deep Purple formed in '68. They've been alive for 5 years. By the end of '73, they'd put out 10 albums. That's just amazing. And I think for anybody they could have retired after those 10 albums and still been one of the all-time classic heavy bands. So massive props for them.
Yeah, you're all good. Interesting points, interesting topics, interesting discussion today. So our average rating for the album is 7.8, which is pretty solid. I think everyone was pretty close together in their ratings, Martin's and everybody here. So we're giving this album 7.8. If you round it up, it's an 8. If you round it down, it's a 7.5, but we're pretty close together, I think. So just want to thank everybody for showing up today, and give us a like and subscribe. It helps our channel grow, and check the links in the description, and we'll see you all next time. Thanks, everyone.